Hello everyone, and welcome back to Warcraft. Now that patch 7.1.5 is out, I thought I'd talk about the changes to Arms Warriors, and the talents that I use in PvE and PvP, with Nighthold coming up just around the corner. It'd be a good time to give a little updated guide on this. So, first off, I know people are going to ask about it, so here's my current item level and stats. After the patch that nerfed secondary stats, I'm still sitting pretty high on mastery. Didn't really lose a whole lot. I think I lost a little bit of versatility at this item level, but that was about it. I wish I had more haste instead of crit, but RNG is fickle, so that's what it's looking at right now. And without further ado, we'll get into the talents. First up is PvE side of things. The standard raid spec is still the same. After some of the buffs to some of the talents, it hasn't really changed. Especially with our set bonus coming up in Nighthold for arms, this spec is just going to get even better with anger management, deadly calm, since the battlecry window is going to be elongated off the 4-piece set bonus is what it's going to look like. It seems they've switched the 2 and the 4-piece, so we're going to have to actually get the 4-piece now, which is kind of a bummer, but it probably needed to be done. So going over the first row here, when I would use something different for PvE, Overpower's basically never going to be taken. It's either going to be Dauntless or Sweeping Strikes. Sweeping Strikes is actually pretty competitive now in Mythic Plus for since it got buffed to 2 targets, and even in some of the raid encounters. There's one in particular that comes to mind that's going to be Nighthold, the botanist guy. I can't remember his name. There's basically always going to be 2 or 3 targets up, so I'm going to be looking forward to testing out Sweeping Strikes instead of Dauntless for that fight. But for the most part, Dauntless is still the go-to. Next here, it's same deal. You're basically never going to take Stormbolt. You'll take Shockwave for Mythic Plus in most situations, unless your comp has a lot of AoE stun anyway. Even though it got nerfed to 3 seconds, it's still really useful. Double Time is going to be the raid go-to, basically all the time. I mean, maybe some of the trash coming up in Nighthold will be pretty dangerous, where Shockwave would become useful again, but for the most part, Double Time is the go-to still. Next row is Avatar. It hasn't changed. Fervor, even though it got buffed, it's still not really that good. Even in really high AoE situations, I wouldn't take it, because you're going to be spending your rage on Sweeping Strikes in those instances anyway on a boss fight. So if there's like 3 bosses coming up, like on that botanist fight, you'd still just take Sweeping Strikes and Avatar to buff that. So Fervor's not really useful. Rend is just, it's not good enough to ever be used over Avatar still in PvE. Next row, it's the same. Bounding Stride's still the go-to. If your healers are struggling, maybe you could take Second Wind in a few fights. I actually did find some uses for this in EN. Yes, it's a DPS loss, but when we were doing progression, some of the mechanics in there that were like permanent passive ticking damage on the entire raid, for whatever reason, Second Wind would actually heal you through it, even though it wasn't intended to, since you were taking damage. So you might want to mess around with that occasionally if you're having a hard time on a fight. D-Stance, very niche for PvE. Probably not ever going to take it. Bounding Stride's just the go-to for that. The next tier, In for the Kill got buffed, but you're still never going to use it. FR is definitely the PvE go-to. Even Mortal Combo, I doubt you would use in Mythic Plus with Sweeping Strikes. I think FR being 30% PvE still is going to be the go-to, even if you do take Sweeping Strikes for it, because it's just going to buff those, obviously. Next here, Deadly Calm, obviously for raids, is still the best. Trauma got a 5% buff, but even in Mythic Plus with Whirlwind, you're not going to use it, because once again, you'd be putting that into Mortal Strikes. This just goes better anyway. Titanic might no longer nerfs the effectiveness of Colossus Smash, but it's still not good for raiding, because Deadly Calm just synergizes too well with Anger Management. And the last tier, Anger Management's your go-to. Opportunity Strikes is pretty good, actually, but not for PvE. It just all these things work together so well, especially with the tier set coming up, that you're just never going to swap out of this for rating, or Mythic Plus for that matter for this. Ravager, I wish they would just replace. Like, nobody ever uses it. It got buffed, but Bladestorm's baseline still does more damage. It's not good. You should always be using Anger Management or Opportunity. And that's basically it for PvE. Other than that, the stats kind of changed as far as priority. Haste is now above versatility for us, but it was kind of that way to begin with at higher gear levels. So, I mean, it's mastery first, haste versus crit last, and that's about it. So, getting into the PvP side of things, I want to look back at the normal talents and then all the new honor talent changes, because basically our whole PvP talent tree got jumbled around and we got some new stuff, and we lost some things as well. So, going back to the first side of things, I want to say that it really depends on what comp you're fighting against and what comp you're playing with as far as my preferred talent setup. Now, these are just my opinions, of course, on a lot of these things, but it's what I've found that works the best in both Arena and Battlegrounds. I'm not really going to talk about World PvP because you're just going to rock people with the raid spec anyway and that. But getting back to Arena side of things, I'm going to base most of this on 3v3, although 2v2 does have, you know, its place, of course. But the first row, go ahead and talk about that. I know a lot of people for PvP are running Overpower and Moral Combo, and that is really good. There's nothing wrong with that spec. The Dauntless Focus Rage build is also good for PvP, despite it being nerfed to 15%. A lot of people don't, think that would be worth it over Mortal Combo. But I'll give you a good example. If you're fighting, say, a Shadow Priest as like a melee team, and you're in a 3v3, most of the time you're going to be sitting on the Priest for the entire game. I know it's not super exciting or whatever outside of CC and swaps on defensives and stuff like that, but for the most part, if you're going to be on one target for most of the game and you're not really worried about cleaving too much, I actually prefer the Dauntless Focus Rage build, because the uptime, if you ever get off target, it's really nice to be able to stack this, and then, you can apply damage without actually being on target, and then it works really well once you get back on target to, Mortal Strike with the 3-stack. That being said, there's nothing wrong with Overpower and Moral Combo, even on one target. I know a lot of people use it, and it's just fine. I'm just saying what I prefer if I'm sitting on one target. Now, outside of that, after the patch and Sweeping Strikes being buffed to hit 2 additional targets instead of 1, if there's ever a time that you're going to be cleaving something, it's probably better to run Sweeping and Moral Combo now, because, you get 2, obviously, hits off of that. And there's another reason why, is because it pairs really well with this talent, which is Sharpened Blade. And the cooldown got lowered, if you didn't know, from before, which means you're going to be able to get 2 of these basically in between each battle cry if you're not using Anger Management anyway for PvP. So with Sweeping Strikes and Mortal Combo now with Sharpened Blade, you can actually put the Sharpened Blade debuff on 3 targets at once. So if you're playing something really burst heavy, like TSG or Turbo, or with a Demon Hunter, whatever, any melee comp like that, it goes really well with Shockwave still, because you can get everything, grouped in together if they stack up, of course, or Death Grips help if you're playing TSG, to Shockwave, and then Sweeping Strikes is going to put that Sharpened Blade debuff on all 3 targets, which just applies crazy pressure, and then whatever your primary target is that you're hitting, obviously, is going to get chunked a little bit lower than that. So it really puts healers behind when they have to pick up 3 targets at once, and they can't really because, the 70% reduced healing. So I really like the new Sweeping Strikes with Mortal Combo. Now, there is certain niche situations where if you're just trying to, Mongo down an entire team at once, maybe you would use Focus Rage with Sweeping Strikes in Arena, but for the most part, I'd say it's the safer bet to run Mortal Combo with it, just to apply, pressure throughout a fight. But if you're just going for, one-shot setup within the first 10 seconds of the match, you might want to stack up to 3 and just, do that. But it only really works if you're fighting another cleave comp and you know for sure that you can get the healer in, because you got to get this on all 3 targets at once, otherwise it's really not worth, it's a big gamble basically to take focus rage with it, because you will be rage starved after the fact if you're using this with sweeping strikes and you're not running mortal combo and you don't secure the kill, in the first 30 seconds of the match. So I would use mortal combo with it in most situations. The second tier, now all 3 of these see use in PvP. Double time I like a lot versus caster comps, especially versus mages, because it just helps you stay on target a lot better. It also depends on what you're playing with, whether or not they have CC themselves. So if you're playing with, a Demon Hunter, for example, right now, they've got 2 pretty good AoE stuns. You don't really need Shockwave. You can run double time in a lot of those situations. But at the same time, Shockwave, even though it's been nerfed, is still extremely good if you can get the 3-target reset on the cooldown to 20 seconds. So once again, really good, even if you're running with a caster comp, like, say, WLS. But at the same time, on WLS, which is Warlock, Warrior, Resto Shaman, if you didn't know, Stormbolt is kind of the go-to because it allows you to either stun your target or their healer at range, since your caster's kind of doing their own thing anyway, and they've got fears outside of it, and there's not really much in the way of stuns for the comp, other than, like, Cap Totem and stuff, but it just depends on what you're running with. All 3 of these will see use, though. And as far as Battlegrounds go, I'll run double time for, like, normal stuff most of the time, just to have, fun uptime with lots of rage. But for rated content, I'd probably run Shockwave in most comps, just because it allows you to really set up on a group of people with Blade Storm and Sweeping Strikes and stuff. And touching on that, with Battlegrounds in mind, Sweeping Strikes is like the go-to all the time now, I'd say, for Battlegrounds, just because you can get 2 extra targets out, in which case I would probably run Mortal Combo still. Maybe FR if you were playing rated and you just wanted to one-shot something, but even then I'd probably run Mortal Combo in all the circumstances for that. Next row, Fervor, I've never used it. I just don't see the point, really. Rend actually sees use every once in a while if I'm fighting a rogue. And then you can run Overpower and Rend and Mortal Combo and stuff, but that's only really if you know that you're going to be forced into hitting the rogue a lot. Say it's with like an Arcane Mage, since they can blink so much now. You might want to run Rend, but in most situations, especially in 3v3, I'd still be running Avatar, just because the Root Break is really useful and the On-Demand Burst is really good. So Rend, even though it got buffed, still isn't that great, even in PvP. Next here, it's basically going to be D-Stance in every situation, whether it be Battlegrounds, Rated Battlegrounds, 2v2 Arena, or 3v3 Arena. It's just too good to not have. Obviously, you kind of need a healer at your back for any of those things to really get the most out of it, but yeah, D-Stance is just the way to go. Maybe I'll use Bounding Stride occasionally in, like, normal Battlegrounds, just because, but most of the time you're going to want D-Stance. Next here, in for the kills, just never used. Mortal Combo, like I was talking earlier, goes really well with Sweeping Strikes or Overpower. Otherwise, FR and Dauntless is still decent if you know you're going to be on one target for a lot of the match. But like I said, in most situations now, you're going to want to use Sweeping Strikes and Mortal Combo if you're going to be cleaving at all. So even on like a Warlock, if you're hitting a pet all the time with this, it's really good, so you can get those kills on the pet easy. Next here, I'm using Deadly Calm still, but I think both of these two actually have some merit in PvP now, especially Titanic Might. But Trauma, being 5% buff, Whirlwind, could actually be pretty good in like Battlegrounds or even Rated Battlegrounds for just, putting out a lot of split pressure, whirlwinding a lot. But at the same time, I think with Sweeping Strikes and Mortal Combo now, you're probably just going to stick Deadly Calm just so you can get more Mortal Strikes out. Titanic might, I haven't had a chance to really test out a lot yet over Deadly Calm, but I want to because we lost Shadow the Colossus as kind of one of our go-to talents in the row here. Now you can still use it, which resets the cooldown on Colossus Smash when you charge, but since you don't always take it anymore, switching targets can be a bit more problematic in 3v3 now if you don't have, proc basically if you get unlucky, in which case Titanic wouldn't help switching targets obviously, but at the same time you could use Shadow the Colossus for, resetting on your primary target if he's getting low but you need a Colossus proc. So this might help the dry spells basically, since it makes it last even longer. But I'd say it's less useful in 3v3 when you're going to be, applying a lot of pressure in a short amount of time with your partner, in which case Deadly Calm is still better, I think. But this might see some use in, say, 2v2 when matches are really long and drawn out because it's just a healer fight. I might try it out some there. It's just, it requires some more testing, I'd say. In most situations, Deadly Calm is still pretty damn good. The last row for this, once again, Ravager's never going to get used. Most of the time, though, Opportunity Strikes is the go-to for PvP because it does a lot of damage over the course of the fight. It's better burst because it's passive burst on top of it, and it pairs extremely well with Wind Fury Totem. If any warriors out there didn't know, you play with a shaman and they've got Wind Fury Totem. It procs off of this, and in turn it procs Wind Fury Totem, so it does a bunch of damage passively when things get low health, so it just pairs really well. Anger Management, you can use, I don't know, it's okay if you pair it with Pain Train and get like really low cooldowns on Wreck, but Recklessness is, I don't want to say it's less useful in PvP than it is in PvE. It's just your template for your stats is so bad in PvP. Like, you go down to like 22% mastery in the arena, so Wreck isn't quite as good. In which case, I would rather use Opportunity Strikes over the course of a longer fight. It just seems to work better than trying to get Wreck up times, because you don't always have a Colossus Smash proc like you would, like for that Wreck, or Battle Cry, excuse me. So I don't use it very often, but once in a blue moon I will run Pain Train with it, just to, try it, if we're really going to be sitting on something for a long time, if you can get good uptime with it, really. Most of the time, Opportunity Strikes, though. And in Battlegrounds, it's basically always Opportunity Strikes. I mean, maybe in a normal BG you want to mess around with Anger Management, you can do it. But moving on to the PvP talent tree side of things, first row's the same as it's been. You'll run Relentless, if you preferred or normal Trinket. I don't use Adaptation very much. I know some healers do, but I don't really run it much as a warrior. Next row hasn't changed. If you're fighting melee, use Sparring. If not, Reinforced is kind of the go-to. Hardiness, I don't really care for it, because the way like rock comps and stuff work at the moment, you're not going to be sitting above 80% health for very long, so you're not going to get the benefit out of it. Also, Reinforced is pretty nice because it helps Victory Rush if you can get a kill on a pet, since it scales off your health percentage. And then the next row, we're getting into the new stuff. Death Row and Death Sentence are the same. The new one is Disarm here, and it's got a 30-second cooldown with an 8-second uptime. It's amazing for peeling melee right now. And since there's a lot of melee comps in the game, it's kind of the go-to for that. If you're not fighting melee, though, and you're just fighting casters, I will swap out to Death Sentence, because Ranged Execute is just super useful. The Death Row talent sounds nice, and it is. It's just Death Sentence is too useful in too many situations to not use it, so I'll always go with that versus like double caster and stuff. But if there's any sort of melee on their team, usually Disarm is the way to go. I did test this against some casters, because in the past you could disarm mages and stuff, and they would take a stat loss and in turn do a little bit less damage. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore, so I would just use Death Sentence versus casters. It's not really worth disarming a mage anymore. Next row, Rage Machine is the same. If you're fighting, I don't know, it's kind of the general like Battleground like normal battleground talent, but in most situations these two are going to be more useful. If you're ever fighting casters, Spell Reflect is hands down my go-to. Even teams with Resto Druids on them, I'll usually run Spell Reflect, try and catch Clone or Roots with. The other new one is Master and Commander, which reduces the cooldown of Commanding Shout by 2 minutes. This talent's really nice because it pairs up really well with a lot of offensives in the game right now, such as Battlecry and Bloodlust on Enhancement Shamans, so a lot of Turbo Cleaves. You can have Commanding Shout up for every time they have a burst window, which is really nice, and even in rated Battlegrounds, you know, you're giving this to your whole team, so it's just really nice to have that uptime. The next row, Pain Train got moved here, and the new ones are Duel and War Banner. Now these two are really interesting. I like Pain Train still for melee teams, of course, so if you're running TSG or something, it's pretty good. Not so much if you're running with a caster. Like if you're playing with a Warlock, you're not going to use Pain Train because they're obviously not really getting the benefit of this because they're not next to you most times. In which case, I would run Duel or War Banner. Now, when the patch first dropped, Duel was not working properly. It wasn't like reducing damage. It should be fixed by the time this video comes out, in which case it is definitely a viable talent. And it's really nice for peeling on rogues and mages or anything really if they're training your healer or your partner. This talent's just really good. It's got good uptime for how long it lasts, just like Disarm, and you can pair the two. So I like Duel. The other one is War Banner, and it's got a way longer cooldown, which might throw you off first, but I actually like this thing quite a bit, especially in Battlegrounds, because it's 50% reduced CC on your team for 15 seconds, and it gives you a little bit of a movement speed increase at the same time. So versus like RMD and RMP and really CC heavy comps, you know they're getting ready to set up, you know, when they do certain things on your healer or whatever, you can drop this, and this is going to reduce all that CC by 50%, which really takes the pressure off when it's getting set up, but you got to plan ahead and know when it's coming to really get the most out of this. In rated Battlegrounds, it's kind of a fire and forget thing, so if you know you're getting ready to dive on a team a team fight, everybody's getting ready to pop cooldown and setup, you can just kind of drop this thing at the very start. That way any sort of CC coming in, you know, AoE stuns, is all going to get reduced, especially when your team's popping cooldowns and want to get pressure out. So this kind of tips the balance in your favor. So I like War Banner quite a bit. And the last row is, I don't know, it's probably the most controversial, I guess would be the word for it. Storm of Destruction sounds great on paper, but it's a little bit lacking. Shadow of the Colossus, I love. But at the end of the day, Sharpened Blade, with its reduced cooldown at 25 seconds, is just so good in so many situations that it's basically my go-to on this tier. In single target setups, it's really good because you can get 2 of these during your battle cry, or 1 in between rather, each battle cry, so it's just a lot of pressure on 1 target. But coming back to that, we'll start out with the Storm of Destruction. This puts Blade Storm on a 1-minute cooldown, and it also puts the Mortal Strike debuff on all targets hit. Now that sounds great, but the problem is that the Mortal Strike debuff you can just apply yourself, especially if you're running Mortal Combo, and especially if you're running Sweeping Strikes. So it's not that big of a deal, and as far as reducing the cooldown by 30 seconds to make it pair up with Battle Cry and Warbreaker, that's pretty good. But on top of that, if you're going to be fighting a team, or a arena team rather, that's going to be stacking up a lot, so say you're fighting a melee comp, or a melee cleave, you're going to be running Sweeping Strikes and Mortal Combo anyway, so this sounds great that you can, you know, Blade Storm every minute, do a lot of damage to both of them, but since you're cleaving anyway, I would much rather use Sharpened Blade and put it on both of them during my rec window with Mortal Combo and Sweeping Strikes. And this just creates more pressure than Blade Storm's damage does. Because Blade Storm, if you don't have Colossus up on everything, doesn't really do a whole lot. So if you have Colossus on 1 target, it kind of, you know, does decent damage to that. But a lot of times you'll find yourself using this thing as a root break still, you know, which really sucks. But it's kind of what it's become. it's not bad, especially in rated battlegrounds. You're still going to be, doing a lot of damage with cooldowns and pairing everything up with Blade Storm. But in arena, I would just rather have Sharpened Blade, even in melee cleaves with sweeping strikes, just to put it on both targets and create pressure. Shadow the Colossus you would use occasionally if you know you're going to be chasing around something a lot and you're going to be hitting one target. Like a mage, for example. If my partner is going to be doing his own thing and I'm going to be chasing a mage around most of the match, maybe I'd use Shadow the Colossus over Sharpened Blade and run Dauntless and Focus Rage or something, just to have high uptime and high output on one target. But even then, the argument could be made for Sharpened Blade because it wins games. It puts the enemy team behind so far because you can get good pressure out after. Say you get a CC chain on the healer and you get somebody down to 50%, you can put Sharpen on them at that point instead of high like a lot of people would. And then that just, that's like 4 extra seconds of CC basically on their healers, so it decides games, and that's why I like it in basically every situation. And it goes the same with Battlegrounds right now, because you're going to be running Sweeping Strikes and Mortal Combo, so this just puts it on 3 targets if you have them all stacked up, which once again is crazy pressure, and that's where Shockwave comes in and allows you to really set that up because the positioning on Sweeping Strikes is really close, so you gotta like stand in between the 2 targets to really hit them. It's not like old Sweeping Strikes used to be. So yeah, it basically sums up the talent changes. It's a little bit different for say 2v2, but even then, I think in most cases you're going to be running Sharpened Blade. Maybe if you're going to be chasing around a really high mobility team, you would still use Shadow or the Colossus, but for the most part, Sharpened Blade's the go-to for that. As is Duel, I'd say, in most of those situations to peel for your healer. It just depends on what you're fighting. If you guys have any specific questions about how to deal with specific teams or whatever, just go ahead and ask in the comments below, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, I'm really looking forward to Nighthold opening up tomorrow as of recording this video, kind of, because it's in the morning at the moment. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all very soon with more content in Nighthold, hopefully. One last thing. The nerf to our set bonus for Nighthold for arms might bump Fury up even higher now, especially since it got some talents changes too. So maybe, Fury's going to be pretty damn good and viable at Nighthold, so I'd say it's pretty safe to play either spec right now. The only reason why I haven't put any points in it or invested any time in like practicing is because of that last post with the hot fixes, that they're going to be enabling the traits past 34 in rated PvP come Season 3 in Legion. So basically it just forces me into putting all my points into the arms weapon still, even if Fury ends up being the more viable option for rating, which I'm fine with because I just like arms anyway. But Fury's even pretty good right now in PvP, believe it or not, since the damage taken got reduced again. So, play whatever you guys want. They're both pretty good. Even in Mythic Plus, I think arms is just fine now. Really helps if you get these pants, of course. But that's about it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Peace.